I know that the school system has changed dramatically over the years, ever since I was growing up. It's so different today, but let me tell you about a scenario that happened to me when I was in grade school. It was all about a question that I asked my teacher and how she responded that would change the way that I learned for the rest of my life. My class went on a field trip to a museum in New York. We piled out of the bus, entered the museum. We were so excited to match what we just learned about ancient Egypt and all of the things that happened back then with what we were going to see in these exhibits. My teacher was pretty good about reining us all in and trying to let us look at the exhibits in each room, but also keeping an eye on us that we weren't straying too far. I was so excited as I was looking at everything in these tall, clear cases, these replicas of hieroglyphs, tools, sarcophagi, pyramids. When I stopped in front of the pyramids, I happened to be at arm's length away from my teacher. So I said, "Could I ask you a question?" And she said, "Yes." And so I said, "I don't know if it's really a question, but I am a little bit confused about how these frail slaves can push these gigantic heavy rocks in these wheelbarrow-looking carts up this incline without falling backward to their death. How are they able to build these in a lifetime to completion? How is that possible?" It just didn't seem to make sense to me. The look that my teacher gave me, I will never forget. She looked at me with disdain. She said, "Well, you just read about it in the textbook, don't you remember?" And I thought to myself, well, yes, I do remember, and I do remember what I read, and that's why I'm asking, but I didn't go there. Probably because back then I felt like maybe it was too rebellious to be asking such a question. But then I thought I was pretty brave in asking that question because I really didn't understand that. I had no way of figuring that to be a possible thing. You want to fast forward decades and decades later, and we realize that there are new discoveries, new learnings, new teachings about things because we're always evolving, right? Things change, and we realize that sometimes we have to rewrite history. We now know that those rocks are limestone and perfectly cut to such precision that it's pretty much impossible, okay, for those ancient Egyptians to build such gigantic, colossal pyramids in such a short time. And there are so many other things that have come out of this constant, digging and research of these amazing pyramids. I don't want to get into that, but let me just say that the way that my teacher responded at that time made me feel so stifled, so unable to understand what it was about school that I was supposed to get learning from. I just thought that we were supposed to go to school not just to memorize things, because certainly there's benefit to some things to be memorized, but weren't we also supposed to be opening our minds and exploring, questioning, creating, and growing? I thought that things shouldn't be stagnant, like science isn't stagnant. It's always evolving, and so shouldn't we evolve? So these things are very hard for me looking back on why I became the way I became, which was, I sort of wanted to blend in with the wall because I thought, why am I sort of being chastised for asking a question that I thought was pretty legitimate? It just didn't make sense to me. And then now I feel, some validation, some sense of validation that there was a good reason for me to ask that question. I ask questions a lot, but more in my mind, more in my head. I learned from that experience and others growing up in school that, asking questions was sometimes frowned upon, sometimes not encouraged. And so I kept things to myself. And I also understand that when we go through life, until something happens to us subjectively, will we, kind of come to that conclusion of, okay, there's something to this, or okay, there's nothing to it. But we just are always growing, aren't we? We're not going to be the same. Who I am today is not who I will be tomorrow. And that goes for everyone, and that should go for everyone. That's why I had to share this story, because I think that maybe if you feel or felt rebellious in school, maybe there was a reason. I don't think I was rebellious, but I think that I did something that maybe was out of the norm. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with being out of the norm, because I feel like we shouldn't suppress uncomfortable ideas or uncomfortable questions. I think we should always be questioning. That's how we become bigger and better. Let me know what you think. But I don't know, that scenario stayed with me and has stayed with me for a long time. It did kind of make me realize why I became the way I am. But I also know that I've also changed since then, and of course in more recent years, because I've learned that we should always encourage curiosity.